By the next day, the fleet was ready to depart, all ships fueled and armed. A leadership conference with all the captains and their exos had just finished, where I instructed them what orders to obey and how. The Navy guys were possibly used to being subordinate to Adeptus Terra, seeing as this was the Sol system. Primarchs, Astartes, Inquisitors and various High Lords would often grab whatever fleet was available for a task or another, though I doubted any of the previous Crusade commanders had my ideas on how to conduct space warfare. Even their best fleet master, Lady Cassandra, was mildly qualified in my eyes, compared to the type of training and practice I had my captains go through. Not her fault, as neural indoctrination chairs were not available to the Imperial Navy, so she had to struggle reading history or technical data page by page, from the often censored scrolls and books of the Shola Progenium or in the Admiralty spires. I gestured her to stay seated and took out a null wand like a marshal's baton. "You will carry this device at all times, my lady. Have it surgically implanted next to your femur, if there's any chance you might not be able to wear it," I demanded in a flat voice. The woman took the wand and examined it for a few seconds. "I will do so, my lord." "But why?" she asked with a frown. "We're going to Cadia, the moat in the Eye of Terror, and a place that probably annoys the Chaos quite a bit. Your fleet's real task will be to harass any enemies we encounter, without losing your ships. This stratagem is called a fleet in being, and is at least 40,000 years old. But that only proves it is still effective now, as it was to our ancestors," I said with a slightly kinder voice. I happen to like smart women. Cassandra frowned again, and tapped her temple with the null wand. "I understand that. My ships do not have very effective weapons, but they can maneuver very well, even in places where warp drives could not. But what is the purpose of this?" she asked, holding the wand up. I thought for a second, then shrugged. "The device is a smaller null rod, which blocks psychers and demons from affecting you with spells. Can't read your mind, or your future, or influence you through the warp. It even keeps most elemental spells at bay, to a point." "So, nothing else? I suspect there is more to this," she muttered, a bit suspicious. "Yes, but you're not cleared to know. In fact, even I don't know exactly what the situation will become, except possible Eldar involvement. However, with the alliance getting ratified right now, I do not expect hostilities with anyone except Chaos forces. Everyone in the galaxy hates Chaos, so we'll probably have some strange allies for a while," I concluded and stood up. "There is more to this," Cassandra grumbled a little as she walked away. As the armored door of the conference room closed, I turned around to find Vadrax removing his helmet and nod towards me. "So the fleet master is my bait?" "Only if Araman comes. Otherwise, is a standard protection detail and you're cleared to engage or not, at your discretion," I explained in a casual voice. The Calexis assassin grinned back at me. "You're a strange one, Lord Lancefire." I agreed completely with his sentiment. "How was training with the Lamenters?" I asked instead. "Well, they are somewhat slower than regular Astartes, but much better armored and armed. Quite excellent quality equipment too. Still, avoid sending them in melee fights, especially against Chaos Marines," the assassin answered with a careless shrug. As expected from someone trained to assassinate difficult targets such as Orc bosses and Chaos Lords, Vadrax wasn't impressed with the skills of my blank sons. He was obviously right, as I've met a few Blade Masters myself. My sons also did not have millennia of combat experience, nor were they decimated in ruthless training to select only the fastest. "And the Silent Sisters?" I wondered with a smile. Vadrax just shook his head. "There are a few who might survive in close quarters, but, no. Without Astartes or Assassinorum grade enhancements, they should not be on the front lines. I would suggest sniper rifles for all of them. A single World Eater could plow through 20 of them with ease, if he gets close." Well, these women were meant to hunt rogue psychers and demons, not traitor marines. I fought a Chaos Sorcerer on Istobon too, and it wasn't too difficult, even without enhancements. Sister Ordella killed 2 greater demons at Fenris, took her like 5 seconds. I'm used in remembrance. And then, there is the Demonifuge, she killed one of ours, a few decades ago. "Why is she on your ship?" the Calexis asked in a colder voice. "Why not? The Emperor gave her the powers. Is she at fault the Inquisition wanted her dead, or for fighting back? I wondered with a sad grimace. That's not what I know. She was empowered by a demonic ritual. He argued back. By the victims of demonic ritual, you mean? The 700 sisters of the Screaming Cage poured their faith and souls into her, to obtain vengeance on that demon. And she has never stopped destroying demons since. Now, in my own line of work I've met many inquisitors. Some I've befriended, or even loved. Others, I executed them and had their rosettes sent back to Terra. That is the problem with those people who are not blanks. Eventually the chaos can get them, Primarchs or Inquisitors alike. Not that I blame chaos for everything. Stupidity, greed and pride can get everyone, even blanks. I answered in a softer tone. That. He started to say and remained frozen in a stasis field. I turned around to find the Emperor himself, holding a tesseract in his hand. I saw you liked my Psi Titan. It was quite expensive, to be fair. Pretty fragile too. I muttered in a disgruntled tone. I worked hard for all the goodies and those tesseracts, plus the crystals themselves. He just waved a hand, producing some samples of Xeno weapons, and my secret data slate with all the inventions, even some too advanced to release just yet. Perhaps it is so. But it would take me too long to produce such weaponry from nothing. And the blanks problem, I've considered it for the past day. Vadrax here, while a decent warrior and loyal to the bone, he would certainly die if implanted with a gene seed. The women are not compatible anyway, due to extra chromosomes. Only you, and your miraculous bloodline can sustain a gene seed implant. The Emperor admitted in a slightly annoyed voice. I just nodded. This wasn't exactly news to me, as I had conducted my own experiments back at Elivar. So, what now? I asked after a minute of awkward silence. I enhanced your body and mind, without going too transhuman with it. Otherwise, you're free to conduct yourself as before, or any other way you please. Go forth and multiply. The Emperor proclaimed while handing me back the null box. I opened the box to see a new warrant of trade, signed by the Emperor himself. The paper itself was glowing faintly, so to a psyker this would likely appear as a raging bonfire of warp energy. I guess I did pay for it, with all the loot I produced for the Imperium. The rosette had a snarling lion inscribed on top of the metal cog. Blaring engrams swiftly informed me I was now an agent of the throne, Ordo Sinister, Chambrox and Dentalis, Perceptor Secondary. Probably the necessary promotion to operate the Psi Titan. Plus requisition things, people and whatever else I needed from every loyal Imperium world. Not at the level of an Inquisitor Lord, or Perceptor Intendant, but probably a normal Inquisitor or such. Killing billions of people for no reason might be frowned upon, and killing trillions of innocent citizens might result in a reprimand or even a recall to Terra for inquiry. But otherwise, free hands. I don't think I'll visit the Imperium much. I muttered with a grim smile and raised my eyes towards the Emperor. He was long gone though. Fleet-wide, form in pattern Gamma, and maintain point defense stations. Then begin engine burn towards Cadia, I commanded over the Voxen network. As the fleet began to accelerate away from the sun, a coded transmission arrived from the Synopticon agent, directly on the manifold circuit. My lord, 3 separate transmissions from the Indomitus fleet. Destinations, Terra, Luna, and Titan. Decoding the contents will take me a week or so. Green hair or not, the boy was quite competent. Well, at least I knew someone would arrive at the party for certain. Now it was only a matter of waiting. Well, my original plans for Cadia were burned and the ash tasted quite bitterly. No more Angron, to provoke the chaos into mindless anger. No more demon weapon, to kill whatever proved too difficult for standard weapons. The only ace remaining was the sounding board, and the necklace tesseract that housed it. However, with a single tesseract, and without my Xeno auxiliaries, I was reduced to less aggressive tactics. I could still move and deploy my own forces at will, but I could not risk my last tesseract by interacting with corrupted beings or engines. Not without solid walls of blackstone and tyrannid biotitans to constrict the warp effects. It sucked, but I was still better off than most commanders in the galaxy could be. Even the tesseract vision alone was a gigantic help, as knowledge of the enemy disposition did allow a coherent strategy, by dispelling the fog of war. As for weapons, I had the strongest weapons of the Imperium to use, from the Singularity and its Void Claw gravity gun to the Black Lament and its Immaterium beam, and even Titans and Psi-Titans. Sisters of Silence, Blanca Astartes and the Templar Psychologist teams formed the Special Forces, while my armor and heavy infantry auxiliary troops had 100 times the firepower of normal Imperial Guard regiments. I had pretty much everything I could want, except superior numbers. However, I doubted the Chaos Forces had that many forces remaining for use. I did sort of decimated their numbers over the decades, not only the invasion forces but even the Dark Forges and various demon worlds I could reach. I hit them behind the lines and burned the production facilities, and the effects of that should be massive even on galactic scale. But, the Eye of Terror itself contained even more demon worlds and hellforges and millions of Chaos Marines. I had not managed to reach that far, and even Trazyn had barely managed to burn a single hellforge at the edge of the Warp Rift, Xena 2. The stable corridor called the Cadian Gate included other fortress worlds like Belis_Corona or Agrippina, and other imperial worlds like Lithar. That name seemed familiar to me, which was bad. Any memories I had of old books about the Black Crusade simply meant something bad would happen in that place. There was some good news though. The Dark Angels and their Primarch were converging towards the Scarus_ sector to the north of Cadia, while the White Scars and Primarch Khan were approaching from the south, via Forge World Mordax. Over 100 Astartes chapters would be present, plus Mechonicus, Adeptus Auroritas and countless regiments from the Astra Militarum and PDFs. Over the holomap of the battlefield, Inquisitor Emmaus simply waited with her eyes closed. Not sleeping, but instead diving into the future for omens and hints. Erebus. He's the one leading the traitor attacks, she revealed after her long psychotrance. Well, considering who Erebus was, can't say I'm surprised. The guy was the architect of the Horus heresy, and the one who turned Lorga to chaos. I'll take care of him, my dear, I answered with a confident voice. She just smiled sadly. Bravery is not a substitute for strength. You don't have to pretend, Pef. I can see you're not truly certain of this battle, unlike the other times we've fought together. A few seconds later, Verlaine tapped another planet on the holomap, marking it as lost. Earthwart, a world so often attacked that people lived in underground bunkers all the time, had finally fallen. Zombies of some kind. The astropathic messages are not clear, the Inquisitor whispered with a deep frown on her face. I leaned back in my chair, and glanced at my fellow princeps from the Ordo Sinister, called Al-Besalam. Didn't look much in the flesh, wiry and thin, but with princeps it was mostly about willpower not muscles. The blank pilot just nodded. I guess this time it won't be as fun. Any troops deployed on the surface could be lost to an orbital strike in minutes. What we need is some kind of protection aura, like the Saints can project over their troops. They call it the inviolable aura, I mused in a thoughtful voice. Al-Besalam blinked at me then glanced at the Inquisitor with wary eyes. And how would you manage that? Our Alpha Psychers are not capable of it. Even if one of them might be a holy person, the ones on the left side are all savage, brutal beasts filled with anger and bloodlust. The darkness needs that to power the Psi cannon. I have some ideas, I said with a wry smile and jumped to my feet. A minute later, I arrived at Sister Stern's quarters, to find her and Sister Darcy playing cards and giggling like schoolgirls. Hello there. Mind if I join? I demanded with a kind smile, and sat on the carpet in front of them. Only if you let me play with Canis again, Darcy demanded with puppy eyes. I tried to resist. My willpower could restrain a Titan's machine spirit. But those eyes, a minute later I just sighed, and picked up the cards. Don't put your hand inside his mouth again. He ate a dozen space marines, hands and feet crunched like twigs. I warned her with a grim voice. The girl didn't quite believe me, but it was very true. They were even lamenters, if traitors. Some hours later, Darcy returned to her room, and I shared a bottle of wine with the demonifuge, while she spun tarot cards in midair. A few glasses later, she leaned on my shoulder for support. I'm going to die again, aren't I? The Emperor's tarot is very certain of it, she murmured in a sad tone. Everyone dies, my dear. Some last longer than others, and some even come back. You think lamenting to a lamenter, on board the Black Lament is fun? I quipped and elbowed her gently. Ha! Your chapter is quite famous for its misfortune, that's true enough. So why did you got me drunk? Wanna taste my pure body, my lord? Ephrael proposed in a tentative voice, even pushing her chest out for emphasis. There's time enough for love. We'll get to that, one day. But no, what I want is your psyker abilities. I bet you'd like riding a titan with me, I answered in a serious voice. She turned to gaze into my eyes, electric currents swirling inside around the blue iris like a maelstrom of concentrated violence and wrath. Only if you let me sit in your lap, she demanded in a childish tone, and obviously copying Sister Darcy's perfect manipulation. So I drew her into a hug, and groped her a little as thanks. It's going to be great. We'll begin tests tomorrow, and see what psyker effects we can obtain together. Stay with me tonight, the pretty sister pleaded in a lonely voice. I tried to resist. I really did. But my bleeding heart wouldn't let me. Plus she did have a fabulous body. The next day, we began working on controlling the psychic gestalt of the Side Titan, at the lowest setting possible. The fortress might be made of blackstone, but a Side Titan would still likely manage to breach the hull anyway. Damned walkers were quite overpowered, even without my miracle girlfriend exceeding all reasonable limits and overcharging the anima circuit with a dozen times the normal amount of psychic energy. I'm not much impressed with the abilities of your Titan, Lord Peth. It's slow, cumbersome, the psi spells lag and take entire seconds to cast, and there's no psi shield or even a Rosarius. All it has its brutish mechanical strength and amazing range for its weapons. The demonifuge complained while leaning backwards and resting on my body like in an armchair. Well, technically my arms were the arms of the chair, so that worked fine. Other Titans are much worse, my dear. I'll show you the Emperor-class Titan in the next hangar. It barely moves at all, so I have to teleport it into battle before the enemy gets bored and simply leaves. And my Titans are all upgraded ones. The relics of the Mechanicus are much worse and take months to shamble around. I explained with a snort, and pawed at her peaks for my comfort. At least my hands had something nice to hold to now, as piloting a Titan was all in the mind and the implant circuits. Probably the exact reason why the Emperor enhanced my brain with his gene magic. He even unlocked the dominant genes of my blank heritage, allowing me to begin learning the real skills of a pariah, from null shields to rebounding psyker spells and draining psyker energy. Standing in the cockpit of a Psi Titan with a potent psyker in my lap and 6 others slaved to the anima circuit empowered me immensely even without drawing from this well of power. All right, I trust you. So what do we try next? Ephrael asked while breathing deeply and pushing her peaks into my hands. Now, we try to make that psi shield. First, a thin one covering the cockpit. Then a slightly larger one over the entire chassis. And keep the power low. No need to blow of the hangar doors. Again, I whispered in her neck, while my mind merged with the machine spirit and gently urged it to listen. A flare of golden light followed, and the armored doors blew out again. Sorry, I'm trying to be weak. Sister Stern muttered in a childish voice. She wasn't really sorry though. A week into our journey towards the Eye of Terror, an alert message arrived from an Inquisition fortress at the edge of the Warp Rift, called Nemesis_Tessera. Vlaine urged me to shift course at once, because there were thousands of Chaos artifacts kept there. Allowing them to be captured would likely create a second front, and potentially release dozens of greater demons into the galaxy. I held a hand up for silence and linked with the fort's machine spirit, computing the new course and the estimated time of arrival. This was the advantage of traveling on warpless engines, the ability to stop or change course at need. Sure, with warp engines you sometimes could traverse the entire galaxy in days, but it wasn't reliable. You could also arrive years, decades, even centuries later or not at all. Nevertheless, it would be a good opportunity to conduct a training exercise with the Navy fleet, and iron out problems before we engaged a larger force at Cadia. If we change course, we can reach Nemesis in 9 hours. I guess they're in luck. I answered after a minute of rechecking all the variables. Thank you, Lord Peth. The Inquisitor whispered barely audibly. But I did hear it, possibly something the Emperor has done to make sure I listen well from now on. I kinda postponed a deep medical exam from my tech priests, maybe a bit wary at what they might find. I felt fine anyway. A minute later, my orders went out to the fleet, and the exact vectors were transmitted for the new course. The Navy fleet was sent 1 billion kilometers ahead and up, to act as bait for my own ships. Then I returned to my room and slept like a baby for 8 hours, in preparation for battle. My mind was my best weapon anyway, so it made sense to recharge it to full. Then, the next morning I gathered the pilots and princeps of the knights, dreadknights and titans and went over the future battlefield map, while the auxilia were getting buttoned up in their tanks, sentinels and fighters. All right guys. Depending on what we find, I'll deploy our armored troops to flank and envelop the attackers, while the fleet covers us from orbit. The Inquisitor has alerted me to an imminent threat on the surface, and possibly below, some relics and artifacts that must not be taken by the Chaos forces. And if the Inquisition is worried, we should be too. I explained in a grim voice. Sister Letitia locked eyes with me. You're landing as well, Lord Pef? She asked into my mind. Most likely, yes. I do have a Psi Titan now, as you have heard. I answered with a smile. What about my sisters? The ones without giant walkers, she continued in the same manner. They should stand ready, as they will be deployed as bridge guards on the ships and maybe overwatch for the Astartes. I don't have enough sniper rifles for all of them, I said with a shrug. The woman frowned, but stood silent. My wife Day just nodded and dragged Zeta after her, and was soon followed by the princeps of the other titan of the Deus Ex Machina. Is that aura spell ready? Al-Besalam asked once everyone had departed for their giant robot walkers. Hard to test it inside the fortress, my friend. Anyways, you will take point and neutralize the strongest enemies, as you do have the experience. I'll focus on winning the orbit, before I make landfall with my Titan. I explained with a level voice. The Ordo Sinister Perceptor measured me for a minute. You know how absurd that sounds, right? He asked in disbelief. I just shrugged and teleported away, sitting down in my command chair to wait. It won't be long now. The Tesseract vision showed me the Indomitus fleet veering off and fleeing from a Chaos War fleet 10 times its size, while firing rapidly with all available batteries. Well, as fast as macro cannons could be said to fire rapidly, since they pushed each giant shell manually, into the loading breech. Hundreds of serfs sweating and cursing while dragging the shell out from the armory, then all along the gun deck to their gun, then load it in a dangerous and painful manner by hand. It took an hour for every new salvo. Still, the Navy did its job, drawing the Chaos attention onto them. My own fleet had a similar number of cruisers and battlecruisers with the Indomitus Navy, plus a couple of battleships and carriers, but we entered the battlefield from below, and engaged the traitors from their blind spot. Torpedoes and lance batteries, plasma cannons and las cannons struck the enemy right as Nova shells detonated in their midst, crumbling their void shields and crippling the escort destroyers and frigates, while a couple of Nova mines vaporized their fighter and bomber squadrons. By the next minute, I was already deploying Titans and tanks on the surface of Nemesis Tessera, with fighter cover right above our front lines. The traitors numbered in the millions, and had tanks of their own, hundreds of Lehman Russ and Chimeras, even a few Baneblades. Perhaps 20 armor regiments, supported by Chaos Marines, Psykers and various demon engines, Chaos Knights and even a Chaos Titan. Whoever planned their assault did not plan for my intervention though. By the time my corvettes launched and engaged the remaining Chaos warships, most of the ground fight was over. Finona, clean up the system if you will. I'll be down on the planet. I spoke with a grin, and my daughter smirked at me. Give them hell, Dad. A couple of seconds later, I stomped the charred ground of Nemesis with my awesome Titan, while holding Miss Stern in my lap. Let's try it now, my dear, I whispered in her hair, and gently squeezed her leather uniform. A burst of golden light covered the battlefield, engulfing our troops, and the allied stormtroopers of the local Inquisition in a protective glow. It works. The Demonofuge shouted in surprise. I just smiled and urged the destroyer to go fast. We blurred and left an afterimage behind, while I just hanged on tight and slashed and kicked and spit with my new mechanical friend. 9 seconds later, the machine spirit ran out of targets. Leave something for me too, next time. The Princeps of Al-Bedalak muttered on the manifold, while swimming in slow motion towards us. Draw back, Stern. We're still in hyperspeed, I shouted at the entranced psyker in my lap. Like magic, the universe resumed its slow course, and tank turrets and boulders fell down all around us. This thing can really amplify my powers. I didn't realize we would be moving that fast. The miracle sister whispered in awe, and leaned into my embrace. I scanned the battlefield to find injured troops and stormtroopers wonder at their newly regrown limbs or eyes, even picking up blown-up legs to show them to their comrades as proof. Perhaps the Emperor had given me a bit more than I first thought. I had a goddess in my arms, not a mere psyker. Cheers of joy and victory emerged from the healed guardsmen, all praising the Emperor and his new saint. I snapped my fingers and began recalling the troops back to hangars and barracks, and just in time. I had just seated myself back into the command chair, watching Finona complete the space battle and incinerate the last remaining battleships before they retreated. "Captain, there's a Lord Inquisitor called Torquemada_Coaches on the Vox. He wants a meeting," my Vox officer said in a curious voice. No way. I did not like his name at all. "Tell him we're in a hurry towards Cadia. Emperor's orders." Was this a bad joke? An Inquisitor named Torquemada? I really did not want to meet him. "I think he's curious about that aura your Titan projected over the battlefield," Lady Villain advised me with a smile. "Yeah, but I'm busy," I answered while sipping my blessed recaf and reviewing the mad dash from the implant's memory storage. It was quite incredible to watch it frame by frame, seconds turning into hours of savage butchery and battlefield massacre. Sure, an entire army could do the same, especially if Titans were involved. But a single machine, in several seconds? What the hell? The minute my fleet arrived in the Cadian_ system, the magnitude of the Chaos assault on the Imperial Bastion nearly frightened me. The Tesseract vision revealed every tiny detail, creating a perfect 3D map of the system and its contents in my mind. Over 10,000 warships, 10 times as many Hellfighters and other smaller demon engines, billions of traitor soldiers and millions of armored vehicles, Xenos of a dozen species, many of them distorted by chaos sorcery and psycho spells. It was almost as bad as I expected. Still, the corner of my mouth raised in a slight smile. "This isn't so bad," I whispered softly. "Open your eyes, my lord. I think it's pretty bad," Semnai yelled and shook my shoulder, pointing at the holographic screen. The human defenders were locked in battle with corrupted invaders on the big screen, losing ships at a much greater rate than the invaders, often choosing to sacrifice their ships in suicidal ramming or reactor detonations, or getting boarded and being massacred in detail. A Black Templar Crusade fleet was engaged over Hive-World Belizza, while their Astartes and Auxilia fought valiantly against overwhelming forces on the surface. I just took a deep breath, and twisted space-time with my mind. The Black Templars and other exposed Imperium forces vanished in the Tesseract labyrinth, and were replaced with blooming ordnance. Plasma warheads, nova mines, incendiary bombs, canisters of nerve gas and atomic bombs, all dispersed over the battlefield in a mere minute. The entire Chaos Army evaporated under my blanket of punishment, with few Titans and big demons remaining in a stunned state. "The meaning of sacrifice is always a better future, Semnai. You will deploy at Cadia with 2 companies, and make sure they obey my commands." "This is too easy, so I bet the worst is yet to come," I answered instead, keeping my voice level. For a second Captain Semnai stood still, eyes fixed on the screen in the cogitator statistics recomputing enemy numbers in the wake of my own strike. "Of course, Lord Lancefire. We are doing the Emperor's will," he said in a rather impressed tone. Partly on automatic control, I began deploying my own forces as needed, countering specific threats with effective countermeasures. Silent Sisters to block and weaken demon princes, my own Titans and Knights to oppose enemy giants and armored regiments to protect soft targets like cities and vital infrastructure. Meanwhile, my eyes turned to the right, where Inquisitor Emmaus was still scrolling through her Nexus arrangement device. "My lady, I think it's better if you direct the Black Templars for now. Melee battles might be awesome and glorious, but unnecessary for now. The Cube allows nearly perfect asymmetric warfare. Use it." My lover smiled thinly at me, and nodded gently. "Take care of Menelao," she demanded instead and vanished from the fort's bridge. Two assets in place, I turned my attention on the Indomitus fleet and contacted their fleet master via the empathic sounding board. Lady Cassandra, link up with Battlefleet Cadia and support them as well as you can. Former orders about fleet integrity still stand. I sent directly into her mind. To her praise, the woman didn't flinch or scream at my intrusion, just bit her lower lip and frowned. I thought my null one prevented psychospells. She answered back, while already directing her officers and captains to fulfill the task I given her. This is not a psychospell. It's merely advanced technology, Fleet Master. Just remember, I need your fleet intact, for later. As soon as the Indomitus fleet Tertius changed course towards the bigger fleet defending Cadia, I turned my head to look at the blank princeps of Albedalak. I need you to defend Hive World Macharia, my friend. There are 300 billion people there, and they need a rally point. You and the Dread Knights will be it. I spoke out loud. And don't grope stern too much. I added with an empathic mental smirk. The thin guy just scowled at me, before he popped right into the Titan's cockpit and stern plopped into his lap. By the next minute, Albesalam and the Demonofuge made landfall among the invaders at Macharia, while the Leviathan Dread Knights and the heavy infantry arrived to defend the Hive cities. I wasn't worried too much about that place now, with a Psi Titan powered by the amazing Miss Stern to skew the odds in our favor. Finona, accelerate towards St. Josmane's Hope World, and blockade it. Nothing in or out. I ordered to the captain of the Singularity, while splitting off escort corvettes and a dozen cruisers for her squadron. It was a big risk, splitting off my forces to cover the entire system. Then again, I could see the big picture as well. While the Imperial Navy had to deal with the fog of war and erratic returns from their Auspex sensors, Necron technology embedded into the Tesseract allowed me to see the entire map at once. What enemy forces were present at Cadia right now, were not sufficient to conquer the system, only damage it and create destruction and panic. An alarm bell rang in my mind at that. Something else had to be going on, either some kind of sorcery ritual by Erebus and maybe Ahriman, or some different type of attack. Just to make sure, I began advancing my fleet towards Vigilantum, a dockyard and training world filled with half-completed vessels and millions of Navy recruits, plus construction and repair facilities, tech priest conclaves and fusion reactor assembly plants for big warships. This was the softest target I could see, and probably the enemy could see that as well. Maybe it was luck, or intuition. Maybe simply baggage of war experience for a century. But after a couple of hours, my guess was vindicated. Warprifts began opening en masse all over the Cadian system, revealing the other surprises that the planners of the invasion had in reserve. Dark Eldar raids descended at the fortress world of Kossapatox and a massive Orkwa carried on hundreds of space hulks at Vigilantum. Captain Chiron scoffed at the emerging new enemies and slapped my shoulder with his dreadnought's massive arm. So this is why we trained for decades on that space hulk at Elivar. There must be trillions of orcs here. My shoulder ached, so I smiled kindly towards the armored lamenter. You know what I see, when I look at these space hulks and their occupants, Captain Chiron? A big fight? He answered with a morose tone. I see free metal for new ships, and unpaid Xenos auxiliaries, eager to battle chaos on my behalf. I see thousands of STC templates waiting to be uncovered, and trade capital for my rogue trader house. I see 50 new Forge worlds opening in the fringe, just to exploit this generous gift I was given. I replied with a grin, then began abducting the incoming space hulks one after another. It hadn't been possible till now, as my mind just wasn't strong enough. Maybe my willpower? I don't know. But since the Emperor took his time to upgrade me personally, I was more. Blobs of intermingled ships, asteroids and void whale skeletons, each measuring over 100 kilometers in length, and sometimes depth would have been impossible to shift into the Tesseract before. Not anymore. It was tiring, but doable. An entire green_crusade which could easily lay waste to a galactic sector just vanished, and remained in stasis in the Necron labyrinth housed in my necklace. Soon enough, I began ejecting unneeded Orc Gretchens and Squigs and most of the weaker raw cranks, directly into the sun, while mentally directing the mind-controlling filaments to take over the Orc bosses and convert their forces to my control. Less than a billion orc remained as Xeno Auxilia after the procedure was completed inside the labyrinth, only the largest and strongest of them, plus specialist units like commandos, meek boys, and pain boys. The work of the orc gods and even chaos gods over the millennia, to steal and divert warp-traveling ships and creatures into these constructs simply served to enrich me now. It wasn't all great though. The orc warfield still pushed against the limits of the Tesseract, and I had to counter them constantly with mental energy. Holding the reins of an entire orc war was hard, even for me. Perhaps it was time to trim the numbers even more, by unleashing most of the new forces on my enemies. So I began empathically directing various orc bosses and war bosses onto different targets. The Dark Eldar first, then other corrupted Xenos or demons, then against Chaos Marines from the Night Lords and Alpha Legion. Sure, the losses of orc lives were horrendous even so, but I didn't mind much. Losing 100 orcs to kill a Chaos Marine, in close melee in underhives or mining tunnels was perfectly acceptable. They will still run out of corrupted Marines before I ran out of orcs to send. At least it wasn't human lives I was spending so liberally. You may think it was all going great, just like I did. But blood and death served chaos too. By the next week, although the invaders' forces were diminished to less than half, and Cadia was intact and well, the next phase of the invasion began. A major warp rift opened right on the surface of Cadia, and out of it poured the real invasion. That is Khan, and the World Eater's Legion. His butcher horde can take on Titans and still win. Captain Chiron warned me as he recognized the Chaos leader. I began deploying more orcs and expendable assets like tarantula turrets to hold off the new invasion force, and commenced retrieving the dispersed lamenters from all over the system. It seemed my luck hasn't failed me. I might not have Angron anymore, but this Khan was a champion of Khorne too. He would do just fine. Ordella, you start preparing your sisters for the A ritual we talked about. I guess we'll do it on Clashes, as it's a nice world of less importance. I spoke towards my special ace in the hole. Sister Ordella was the strongest pariah in the galaxy right now, and among the most skilled ones. Her presence on a world was always a nightmare to normal people, and fits-inducing or even outright death to some psychers, even without using her Omega-minus active abilities. That made deploying her in battle a constant concern, despite her obvious effectiveness against demons or sorcerers. Having my own auxiliary troops lose morale and sob uncontrollably during a major battle wasn't all that fun to deal with, and for normal civilians it was even worse. Sister Decima was only an Omega-level pariah, which had mostly the same kind of consequences when she was deployed, but on a lesser range. Continent-wide instead of planet-scale. She should work fine on the Elysian fields of Cadia, where the major chaos push was taking place right now. Captain Chiron let out a pained grunt when the pariah sisters emerged from stasis on the bridge. So we're still doing that plan, my lord? You know it's pure lunacy, right? Just make sure this Khan doesn't die yet. Remove his limbs and subdue him, that's it, I demanded in a stern voice, and nodded towards Sister Ordella. The woman tried to smile then abandoned the attempt in the middle. Don't die, Lord Pef. You promised me we'll have children, one day. Ordella spoke in a sad voice, then slammed her visor down before I could see her blush. Unlike Decima, I have found Ordella before she could take the silence vow, which was sometimes handy. It didn't matter as much, since she simply couldn't live among normal people. Her blessing was a real curse too, denying her a normal life. Other blanks had it much easier, though still not great lives among normal people, still being subject to discrimination and being isolated. Being accusing of smelling bad or looking suspicious wasn't all that nice, even for minor blanks that didn't even know they were psychic nulls. It got much worse when they were found out, from being tortured or exploited to being converted into weapons, as assassins or simply psycho-countering Ash. I just shrugged carelessly, mixing confidence and arrogance in my expression. I've died before, Ordella. It's no big deal. A minute later, I had Sister Decima get ready for the champion abduction, with Dreadnought Chiron serving as the mechanical vice and the pariah sister as the pliers. 1,000 starfighters dove for a ground attack, while I spread incendiaries and grenades over the invasion force, to keep their heads down for a moment. In the midst of flames and explosions, a small team inserted via the Tesseract, a squad of Terminator armored lamenters, a mighty dreadnought and a thinly armored sister. Grab the axe too. I mentally urged Decima as she landed feet first on the Chaos Champion's shoulder, and breaking his god's protection with her null aura. Then Chiron just moved, impossibly fast and precise, his power claw slicing away arms and legs, while the other power fist grabbed Khan's neck in a steel-crushing grip. Meanwhile, the Terminators unleashed their barrage of gravity guns and ancient atomizer cannons, creating a deadly perimeter. Now, normal procedures for extraction wouldn't work right now, so Decima just slapped a teleporter beacon on the back of the champion and then flared her pariah shield to overcome the warp rift. The second the rift closed, Khan was teleported away and guided towards the sacrifice altar being raised on the glaciers of Classius, while my Lamenters and Decima folded neatly back in the Tesseract, along with the looted Gore-Child axe. "It won't work, human. Your Emperor warned you as well." An alien voice spoke from the door of the bridge, just as I retrieved the axe to observe it in detail. It was a heavy and gory axe chain, made of adamantium and whirling chain teeth made of real dragon teeth. "You mean the ritual, Solitaire?" I asked the newcomer. "Yes, the ritual. And I'm not just a harlequin. You should know when to listen," the Eldar muttered in a displeased tone, just as the ritual began forming on the ice world, with Ordella guiding the powers of her sisters to reverse the Khorne's blessing over his champion. Can't say I was actually surprised at his admission. Segura was a god too, and had access to millions of years of advanced knowledge and technology, plus reality warping powers. Of course, messenger. But things are rarely what they seem, in this universe. Perhaps I do know better. And perhaps I am not working alone on this, I whispered just as another Blackstone fortress arrived in the system. Although the new battle station was sporting forged Venatoria markings, and carried thousands of Venatoria tech priests, a Titan Legion and the entire Sol _Drinkers Astartes chapter, I knew very well who was holding their strings. A mad robot with an infinite amount of resources and no moral compass to hold him back. No soul either. The Solitaire Harlequin measured me with a piercing gaze, before slowly turning towards the exact spot where Trazin and his Blackstone warship has just emerged. "That's an insane risk you're taking, human. You're lucky we had a backup plan, and our own talisman," he murmured in a soft growl, just as the third Blackstone fortress emerged into the system, cloaked and invisible to any sensors, almost. I just pointed in silence at the new arrival. The Eldar messenger just blinked slowly, and before his eyelids raised, he was just gone. "Stern, you're next," I sent directly in the Demonifuge's mind, and moved the Polaris Psi Titan right beside Ordella and her praying silent sisters. Almost immediately, a new sun rose in the Cadian system, as the world of Classius was engulfed into a blinding golden light, a result of the ritual channeled by Miss Stern and amplified by the Psi Titan soul circuits. This wasn't mere light though. I should have suspected the Emperor have read my memories and plans, and made the necessary arrangements. His goals had not changed in past 10 millennia, after all. He had simply gotten a trillion times stronger. I took a step through my labyrinth and arrived beside Trazin the Infinite, the Necron Overlord with his own giant collection of valuable artifacts and people. "Hello again, Lord Trazin." I spoke gently, and held my hand out to retrieve Canis, just in case. And as always, the stranger with his puppy is once again a step ahead of me. "You called the Eldar too?" the Necron asked while 1,000 Astartes stomped down just one time behind him. "Just get ready, Necron Lord." I counted over 2,000 broken pylons on Cadia. A third of the field power is gone, so I had to improvise a quick fix. Segura himself was amused with the idea, and lent me a hand. I argued with a small white lie. I mean, my analysis of the situation was not wrong, only my contribution. But Trazin should be a bit more wary now. The Necrodermis robot turned to stare at me, and my wolf, with dispassionate green glowing eyes. Collecting what I wanted will be much more difficult now. "You'll owe me again, Pef Lancefire," the Necron demanded in a glacial tone. "We'll trade, value for value, Lord Trazin. Right now, you're under my protection, as agreed by the Emperor of Mankind himself. How long until you can restart the field?" I asked, pointing at the fortress world of Cadia, and its 5,000 remaining Blackstone pylons. "There is a certain Inquisitor in the control room. And a certain Custodes too. This brings back memories, right? The Necron Lord asked instead, avoiding my own question. Should I be worried? Nah. It had worked before too, even without Trizin being involved directly. In a second, we flashed through Trizin's labyrinth to arrive before Inquisitor Greyfax and her Custodes Watcher. My lady, you look amazingly well, I observed with a wide grin, while measuring my one-time lover. Pef. There is a green alien robot at your side. And I suspect it's exactly the one who held me and the Custodes captive for centuries. The woman growled in a slightly angry voice. I just shrugged and patted the metal guy on his back. Mysterious ways, Lady Inquisitor. Anyways, leave the Xenos to the Ordo Xenos, I'd say. Or did you quit Ordo Hereticus since we last met? If looks could kill, well, they can, unless someone is immune to psycho spells. You humans can flirt for an hour or two. I'll get to work now. Trizin advised me with a robotic smirk, and summoned his hieroglyphic menu to start up the Necron engines under Cadia once more. The Custodes simply ignored the Necron as if it was a statue beneath his notice, and stepped forward to pet Canis like an old friend. Even without my prompt, the wolf just purred in delight and enjoyed the scratches, making Lady Greyfax scowl even more. Humph. Boys and their dogs. You look taller, Pef. The Inquisitor remarked in a warmer tone, and approached me close enough for an awkward hug. It was a simple fact, but somehow her telling me that made me feel better. The Emperor must have given me larger shoulders, for a heavier duty. How is Amalia? I wondered about our blank daughter. On a black ship, learning her powers. She keeps a diary already, with all your exploits. And her wolf is fully grown already, she whispered in a gentler voice. Good. Perhaps in a decade, our family can gather in the fringe at once. Like a family reunion. I proposed in a soft tone as well. She drew back a little, searching for something into my eyes, probably just to make sure I was serious. Perhaps. So what is the Necron doing here? She asked coldly, back in Inquisition mode, Ordo Hereticus style. Should I tell her? Not everything, of course. Lord Trizin was instrumental in closing the Hadex anomaly, and dozens of other warp rifts. His expertise is needed once more. I explained in a level tone, then glanced towards the always present Eye of Terror, its purple gaze present even underground in these Necron caverns. It wasn't actually emitting light either, just like the new golden sun in this system. And I expect to be repaid in full for my efforts, humans. Don't forget that. The Necron added in a morose voice. That too. I mused, a bit amused. A giant scream of anger and wrath emerged from the giant warp rift, followed soon after by a similarly giant claw. A few seconds later, another claw, but a pink one, erupted from with the Eye of Terror. That's not corn. The Custodes whispered while his eyes began glowing with gold light. I gulped a wad of saliva, as the two claws started to cross the vast space towards Cadia. Then again, perhaps it wasn't all bad. 2 out of 4? It's my lucky day. I quipped in a joyous voice, mostly to raise morale among my party. Canis glanced at me like I was stupid. Lady Greyfax and the Custodes were not very impressed either. Hold them off for an hour. The infrastructure is a bit damaged and rerouting the energy is not easy. Trizin asked with a calm and certain voice. Definitely not visiting in person then, the brave Necron overlord. Well, I didn't really have a plan for 2 Chaos Gods coming out to play. I might need a miracle, and very soon.